The corporate lawyer came home expecting his wife's silence, the way he always did, but this time the house answered back. Every drawer emptied, every closet stripped bare, and on the kitchen island where Asha Ose once set his morning espresso, a single USB drive sat on top of their marriage certificate, the word evidence written across it in her steady hand. What he didn't know, what Garrett Hale could never have predicted, was that the woman he'd spent 6 years breaking had already built the case that would bury him. And she was watching from a place he'd never think to look. Have you ever seen someone walk away from everything they owned with nothing but the truth in their pocket? Have you ever watched a person so powerful they thought consequences were for other people? This is the story of a man who confused control with love, and a woman who proved that patience is the deadliest weapon. But before the end, someone's life would be shattered beyond repair. And it wouldn't be who you think. Hit that subscribe button, because this story will make you question everything you believe about justice. Let's go back to where it started. To the morning when Asha Ose realized she'd counted the steps between the bedroom and the back door for the last time. 17 steps through the hallway, 9 across the mudroom, 1 through the side entrance into the garage. She'd memorized the route the way soldiers memorize escape plans, not because she wanted to run, but because she needed to know she could. The Hale residence sat on a tree-lined crescent in Oakville, Ontario. Stone facade manicured hedges, the kind of house that made neighbors assume perfection lived inside, and from the outside it did. Garrett Hale was a senior partner at one of Bay Street's most prestigious law firms, handsome, articulate, the kind of man who remembered your name at fundraisers and donated generously to children's hospitals. Asha had believed in that version of him once. She'd been 25 when they met, a second-year nursing student volunteering at a community health fair in Mississauga. He'd been 32, already making partner, already perfecting the smile that made people trust him. Their courtship had been fast and consuming. Within a year she'd dropped out of her program. Within 2 they were married. Within 3 she understood that the man who opened doors for her in public locked them behind her in private. Your coffee's ready. She set the cup on the granite counter without looking at him. Garrett didn't acknowledge her. His attention was fixed on his phone, scrolling through case files with the focused aggression of someone who turned every interaction into a courtroom. The Morrison deposition got postponed. His jaw tightened. Opposing counsel filed a motion to compel. 6 months of preparation, and now some junior associate thinks he can stall me. Asha kept her expression neutral. She'd learned to read the atmospheric pressure of his moods the way prairie farmers read storm clouds. Low voice meant irritation, tight jaw meant frustration, and frustration in their household rolled downhill. She moved toward the sink, but his hand caught her forearm. Not violently. That was the thing about Garrett. In the early years nothing he did seemed violent in isolation. A grip that lasted a beat too long. Fingers that pressed into the soft tissue between bone and tendon. Casual, almost absent-minded control. Did I say you could walk away? His voice carried that particular softness she'd come to fear more than shouting. I was going to rinse the I'm still talking. His thumb found the bruise from Tuesday, pressing into it with precision that couldn't be accidental. You know I don't like being dismissed in my own home. She held still. Movement meant escalation. Escalation meant the kind of night that required long sleeves in July. I'm listening, she said. That's better. He released her arm the way someone drops a pen. Carelessly, as if she weighed nothing. I need the car detailed before my client dinner tonight. And cancel whatever you had planned. I want you there, looking appropriate. She nodded. The women's health clinic in Hamilton where she'd been secretly volunteering for 2 years would have to wait. Again. Oh, and Asha. He paused at the kitchen doorway without turning around. Don't wear that blue dress. It makes you look heavy. The comment landed where he intended it to. Directly on the wound he'd been carving for 6 years. She used to be a woman who moved through the world with purpose. Nursing school. Volunteer work. Friends who called her the strongest person they knew. Garrett had disassembled all of it, piece by piece, until the only identity she had left was his wife. But what Garrett didn't know, what he'd never bothered to suspect, because narcissists don't investigate what they've already dismissed, was that Asha had been rebuilding herself in secret. Behind the bathroom vanity taped to the back of the mirror was a prepaid phone. In a safety deposit box at a TD branch in Burlington, she kept USB drives containing 4 years of recordings. And in a quiet office above a Portuguese bakery in Dundas, a woman named Josephine Tran was assembling those recordings into a legal file that would end Garrett Hale's career, his freedom and his reputation in a single coordinated strike. Josephine wasn't just any lawyer. She was Asha's older cousin, the one Garrett had forbidden Asha from contacting 3 years ago, claiming Josephine was a bad influence and jealous of their lifestyle. In reality, Josephine was a Crown prosecutor who'd spent 12 years putting domestic abusers behind bars, and she'd been waiting for this case since the first time she noticed bruises on her cousin's wrists at a family reunion in Brampton. Today was the day. Asha waited until the sound of Garrett's Mercedes faded down the crescent. Then she moved. Not frantically, but with the calm efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed this moment in her mind every night for 18 months. The go bag from the basement storage locker, the documents from the safety deposit box, the burner phone with one contact saved. She typed 3 words and hit send. It's time, Joe. Have you ever had to plan your own escape from someone who was supposed to protect you? Tell me in the comments what you'd do in her position. The Morrison case didn't just fall apart. It detonated. Garrett walked through the front door at 11:15, that night carrying $800 worth of scotch-fueled rage and a bruised ego that demanded payment. The client dinner had gone sideways. Opposing counsel had ambushed him with evidence he should have anticipated, and the senior partners had witnessed his humiliation in real time. His reputation, the only thing Garrett valued more than control, had taken a public hit. Asha. His voice cut through the house like a blade across glass. No response. The kitchen was dark, the living room empty. Her car was still in the garage, but the house had that hollow quality, like a body after the soul has left. He found her in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of their bed, hands folded in her lap. She was wearing the blue dress, the one he'd told her not to wear, a deliberate act of defiance so small that most people wouldn't notice. But Garrett noticed everything when it came to disobedience. I told you not to wear that. His voice dropped to the register she feared most. Conversational, almost curious, like a scientist observing an experiment. I didn't feel like changing. The slap came from his right hand, open-palmed, connecting with the left side of her face with enough force to knock her sideways off the bed. She hit the hardwood floor shoulder first, pain blooming from her collarbone to her temple. He stood over her, adjusting his cufflinks. 6 years and you still can't follow simple instructions. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since year 3. Instead, her right hand moved slowly beneath her body, pressing the record button on the device she'd sewn into the lining of the dress. The blue dress. The one she'd worn on purpose because she knew what was coming. Because after 4 years of recording his violence, she'd learned to read his patterns the way he read case law. With cold, clinical precision, he grabbed her by the hair, pulling her to her knees. You embarrassed me tonight. My partner saw me lose emotion, and when I came home looking for my wife, I found an empty house reeking of disobedience. I was here the whole. Don't lie to me. He knew she'd been out. He always knew, because the mileage tracker he'd installed on her car reported every kilometer to his phone. 37 extra kilometers today. Where? The health clinic. But she'd never tell him that. The women's shelter in Hamilton, where she'd been counseling survivors. The very women who'd taught her how to document abuse without getting caught. She'd gone nowhere, she told him. The odometer must be wrong. His fist connected with her ribs, folding her in half. The pain was white and total, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. But even as her vision swam, her mind was cataloging. Date, time, location of impact, estimated force. The way she'd been trained to document injuries during her 2 years of nursing school. The education he'd made her abandon. When he finished, after the threats about her family, after the warning about what would happen if she ever contacted Josephine, after the casual promise that he could have her declared mentally unfit and institutionalized, he straightened his shirt and walked to the door. Clean yourself up. We have brunch with the Hendersons on Saturday. Try to look like someone worth being married to. Alone on the cold hardwood, Asha pressed her palm against the recording device hidden in the dress lining, and whispered 2 words into the fabric. Got it. In a quiet office above a Portuguese bakery in Dundas, Josephine Tran heard those words through her headset, and began typing the warrant application she'd been preparing for 2 years. At what point does survival become more important than the life you thought you wanted? Share your thoughts below. Garrett woke at 6:40 to silence. Not peaceful silence, the kind of silence that hits different when you've built your life on someone else's fear and that fear suddenly goes quiet. Asha. Nothing. No coffee smell, no sound of breakfast. Just emptiness and a feeling in his gut that he hadn't experienced since losing his first case. The realization that something had gone wrong in a way he couldn't fix with words. He searched the house with increasing panic. Her clothes were gone. Not all of them. She'd left the designer pieces he'd chosen for her, the cocktail dresses and statement jewelry that had always been costumes rather than choices. What was missing were her nursing textbooks, her mother's recipe binder, the photo album from before their marriage. Things that mattered, things that were hers. On the kitchen island, the USB drive sat like a grenade with the pin pulled. He picked it up, turned it over, read the word evidence in her careful printing. His hands began to shake. He called her cell, disconnected. Called her mother in Montreal, went to voicemail. Called the one person he'd forbidden her from speaking to, Josephine Tran. Speaking. Where is she? The silence on the other end carried the weight of 6 years of documented violence. I think you know I can't tell you that, Garrett. She's my wife. She's a human being who has the right to not be beaten in her own home. And before you threaten me, you should know that everything she documented is already in the hands of people you can't intimidate. His legal mind kicked in, searching for leverage, loopholes, strategies to contain the damage. But Josephine was a prosecutor. She'd spent her career anticipating exactly these moves from exactly these men. Every recording is time-stamped and authenticated. Every medical record has been verified. Every photograph has metadata that proves chain of custody. You're not talking to a scared woman anymore, Garrett. You're talking to the Crown. The line went dead. Within 3 hours he'd discovered that Asha had quietly redirected her access to their shared accounts, copying financial records that showed how he'd used firm resources to monitor her movements. She'd documented the GPS tracker on her car, the keylogger on her laptop, the spyware on her phone that recorded her calls and forwarded them to his private email. She hadn't just run. She'd conducted a 4-year investigation into her own husband, with the patience and precision of someone who understood that the most dangerous moment for an abused woman is the moment she tries to leave. And she'd waited until the case was airtight before taking a single step toward the door. Have you ever realized too late that the person you underestimated was always 10 moves ahead? Drop a comment if you've seen karma work in real time. The first email arrived at Garrett's firm at 9 o'clock Monday morning. It didn't come from Asha or Josephine. It came from the Durham Regional Police, forwarded to every senior partner at the firm with a subject line that read, Criminal Investigation, Garrett R. Hale, file number 2024 DV3847. By noon the managing partner had called an emergency meeting. By 2 o'clock Garrett's office door was locked from the outside, his access card deactivated, his client files reassigned. By 4 o'clock, the Law Society of Ontario had opened a professional conduct investigation. His assistant Rachel, the one who'd noticed bruises on Asha's arms at the Christmas party but never said anything, resigned by email with a single sentence, I should have spoken up sooner. The story broke on CP24 that evening. Prominent Bay Street lawyer under investigation for domestic violence and criminal harassment. The anchor read the details with the carefully calibrated shock that Canadian news broadcasts reserve for stories about people who were supposed to be respectable. Social media moved faster. Former classmates, colleagues and clients surfaced with anecdotes they'd dismissed for years. The way Garrett spoke to waitstaff. The time he'd grabbed a junior associate's arm during an argument about billing. The pattern that everyone had noticed and no one had named. The Asha had collected was devastating in its thoroughness. 4 years of audio recordings captured on devices hidden throughout their home. Photographs of injuries taken with clinical precision. The nursing training he'd forced her to abandon had become the tool she used to build his prosecution. Financial records showing how he'd systematically cut off her access to money, transportation and communication. The GPS tracking data alone was enough for criminal harassment charges. But what destroyed Garrett's reputation most completely was his own documentation. Asha had discovered files on his home computer where he'd kept what he called compliance protocols. Detailed notes about which forms of discipline produced the best results with minimal visible injury. He'd approached his wife's abuse with the same analytical rigor he applied to case law. Hitwear clothing covers. Control phone access during weekdays only. Weekend monitoring creates suspicion. Maintain public affection to offset private correction. The notes read like a manual written by someone who'd confused cruelty with competence. When they surfaced online, the response was visceral and unanimous. Even people who'd been skeptical of abuse allegations found it impossible to defend a man who'd literally created a spreadsheet for domestic violence. What's more satisfying, instant justice or watching someone's carefully built facade crumble in slow motion? Tell me which you prefer. Garrett hired a criminal defense lawyer, the most expensive one in Toronto. But even Martin Crowe, QC, who'd successfully defended executives, politicians and a retired hockey player, looked uncomfortable reviewing the evidence file. Garrett, there are over 400 hours of recordings. She documented everything. The charge sheet it's entrapment. She deliberately provoked. Martin held up his hand. Don't finish that sentence. Not to me, not to anyone, and especially not in any courtroom in this province. That line of defense will destroy whatever sympathy you might have left. The arrest happened at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. Peel Regional Police sent 4 officers to the Oakville house. They were professional, efficient and visibly disgusted. Garrett Hale, you're under arrest for assault causing bodily harm, criminal harassment and uttering threats. You have the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay. The handcuffs were stainless steel, standard issue, nothing special. But on wrists that were accustomed to Cartier watches and French cuffs, they looked like the punctuation at the end of a very long sentence. The neighbors watched from their porches. The ones who'd heard sounds through the walls at night, but convinced themselves it was just a heated argument. The ones who'd seen Asha in long sleeves during heat waves and chosen not to ask. They watched, and some of them cried, and none of them felt entitled to forgiveness for their silence. Have you ever watched someone powerful face consequences they never believed would come? How did it feel? Tell me in the comments. The courthouse on Hurontario Street had seen its share of ugly cases, but the gallery was standing room only on the morning the Crown presented its evidence against Garrett Hale. Josephine Tran sat in the front row, not as prosecutor. She'd recused herself due to the family connection, but as a witness and as the woman who'd coordinated the investigation from the moment her cousin first called her from a locked bathroom in Oakville 3 years ago. The Crown attorney, a meticulous woman named Helen Fong, laid out the case with surgical precision. 4 years of recorded evidence, 14 documented incidents of physical assault, a pattern of coercive control that included financial restriction, social isolation, technological surveillance and psychological manipulation. She displayed the compliance protocols on the courtroom monitors. Garrett's handwriting filled the screen. Neat, precise, organized by date and outcome. The gallery gasped. Several jurors looked away. One woman in the back row stood and left, her hand pressed over her mouth. But it was Asha's testimony that broke the courtroom open. She'd been dreading this moment for months. Sitting in a witness protection apartment in Kitchener, rehearsing her statement with a victim services counselor. Fighting the voice in her head that still sounded like Garrett telling her she was too stupid to be believed, she walked into the courtroom wearing scrubs. Not because she'd come from a shift, but because she'd re-enrolled in nursing school 3 weeks after leaving Garrett, and the uniform reminded her of who she'd been before he'd taken that away. She spoke at for Solsemnasimitz, not with the dramatic delivery of television courtrooms, but with the quiet precision of a woman who'd been trained to observe, assess, and document. She described the first time he hit her. 14 months into their marriage, after she'd mentioned wanting to reconnect with her cousin Josephine. She described the escalation pattern, the way he'd test boundaries, then retreat, then push further. The cycle of violence followed by gentleness that kept her questioning her own reality. She described the night she decided to start recording, not a dramatic revelation, but a mundane Tuesday when she'd been cleaning blood from the bathroom tiles and realized she was narrating the injury in her head as if writing a nursing assessment. Left orbital contusion, approximately 3 centimeters, consistent with blunt force trauma, she'd thought. If I'm already documenting this in my mind, I might as well make it count. Most powerfully, she described why she hadn't left sooner. Not because she was weak, she said, looking directly at the jury. Because leaving is the most dangerous thing an abused woman can do. 75% of domestic homicides happen when the victim tries to leave. I didn't stay because I was afraid to go. I stayed because I was building the case that would make sure he could never do this to anyone else. The courtroom was silent. Josephine's hands were shaking in her lap. Even the defense lawyer looked like he wished he were somewhere else. Your Honor, Helen Fong said, the Crown submits that this case represents one of the most thoroughly documented patterns of domestic abuse in Ontario legal history. The defendant didn't just assault his wife. He systematized it, he optimized it, he treated violence as a professional skill. Garrett tried to speak from the defendant's box. His lawyer physically stopped him. Whatever he wanted to say, whatever defense he'd constructed in the privacy of his own delusions, died unspoken. The judge's expression made clear that no words from the accused would improve his position. The verdict came in 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Have you ever seen the moment when someone finally gets exactly what they deserve? What did it feel like? As Helen Fong entered the sentencing phase, she introduced one final piece of evidence that Asha hadn't known about until that morning. Evidence that would reframe the entire case in a way no one in the courtroom expected. Your Honor, the Crown would like to present testimony from a previous partner of the defendant. A woman in her early 40s took the stand. Her name was Claire Beaulieu, and she'd been Garrett's girlfriend for 3 years before he met Asha. She'd never reported what happened to her. She'd never told anyone. But when she saw the news coverage, she'd called the Crown Attorney's office and said 5 words. He did the same to me. Claire's testimony was brief and devastating. The same pattern, the same escalation, the same compliance protocols, though in her case, he'd kept them in a leather journal rather than a computer file. The same threats about destroying her career if she spoke, the same isolation from family and friends. I thought I was the only one, Claire said, her voice steady. I thought there was something wrong with me that made him act that way. When I saw Asha's case on the news, I realized there was nothing wrong with me. There was something wrong with him. The sentence came down like a hammer. 12 years federal, no parole eligibility for 6. The judge's statement was measured but unflinching. Mr. Hale, you used your legal education not to uphold justice but to systematize cruelty. You treated your partner's body and mind as objects to be controlled and corrected. The court finds no mitigating circumstances. Garrett was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. As he passed the gallery, Josephine stood. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her presence, alive, professional, unbroken, said everything about the family he'd tried to erase from Asha's life. And Asha, still in her scrubs, walked out of the courthouse into October sunlight and breathed air that tasted different. Not because the world had changed, but because she finally had room in her lungs to take a full breath. Could you endure years of pain to build a case that would protect others? How far would you go? The first year after the trial, Asha finished her nursing degree. She graduated from McMaster with a specialization in trauma care, and the standing ovation she received from her classmates lasted longer than the ceremony required. The second year she began volunteering at the same Hamilton clinic where she'd once sought help, but this time as a registered nurse and a certified domestic violence counselor. She led support groups on Tuesday evenings. Women who'd been where she was. Women who were still there. Women who were planning their escape and needed someone who understood that leaving isn't a single act of courage but a months-long operation that requires strategy, resources, and an unshakable belief that you deserve to survive. The third year Josephine helped her file the paperwork for a nonprofit. They called it the Osei Tran Foundation. Asha's surname, her mother's name, hyphenated with Josephine's, because this work had never been about one woman's escape. It had been about two women building something that would outlast both of them. The foundation operated out of a converted Victorian in downtown Hamilton. Open floor plan, lots of natural light, a children's area with books in 12 languages. Deliberately nothing like the dark controlled spaces where abuse thrived. In its first year the foundation provided legal aid to 147 women. Sheltered 62 families. Placed 89 women in jobs or training programs. And developed a digital evidence toolkit, an app disguised as a meditation timer that could record audio, photograph injuries with automatic metadata tagging, and upload everything to encrypted cloud storage accessible only by the user and their designated legal contact. Asha had designed the app herself, working with a team from the University of Waterloo's engineering department. It was based on the same methods she'd used during her own years of documentation, refined and made accessible to any woman with a smartphone and the courage to press record. We don't just help women leave, Asha told a CBC reporter during a profile segment. We help them build cases that stick. Because leaving without evidence means leaving without protection, and protection is what keeps women alive after they walk out the door. The foundation's work attracted national attention. The federal government cited it in a policy paper on coercive control legislation. The Law Society of Ontario partnered with them to develop training modules for lawyers on recognizing domestic abuse among colleagues and clients. McMaster University created a scholarship in Asha's name for nursing students who'd survived domestic violence. And Claire Beaulieu, Garrett's first victim who'd spent 15 years believing she was alone, joined the foundation's board of directors. She ran a peer mentoring program that paired survivors with women currently navigating the legal system. Her first mentee was a young lawyer whose husband had been using the same isolation tactics Garrett had perfected. Some patterns don't die with one prosecution, Claire told a room full of trainees. They get passed down, copied, adapted. Our job isn't just to stop individual abusers. It's to make the pattern visible so people can recognize it before it takes root. Garrett, serving his sentence at Collins Bay Institution in Kingston, knew nothing about the foundation or its work. His access to media had been restricted after an incident in the general population. The same kind of incident that happens to men convicted of violence against women in federal institutions. He'd been moved to protective custody, where he spent 23 hours a day in a cell the size of his former walk-in closet, with a man serving time for fraud who refused to speak to him after learning what he'd done. Once in his second year he'd written a letter to Asha. Not an apology. A legal argument about why his sentence was disproportionate, citing case law and procedural errors. Josephine intercepted it, read it aloud to Asha over the phone and they'd both laughed, not cruelly, but with the exhausted relief of people who finally understood that the man who'd terrorized them was not extraordinary, he was ordinary. A small man with a law degree and a pathological need for control who'd been undone by a woman with a prepaid phone and the patience to outlast him. 5 years after the trial, Asha stood at the podium of the foundation's annual fundraiser in Toronto. The ballroom at the Fairmont Royal York was full. Survivors, advocates, lawyers, politicians and 300 people who'd bought tickets because they believed that domestic violence was everyone's problem. My name is Asha Osei, she said. And 10 years ago I was counting the steps between my bedroom and my back door. She paused. The room was silent. 17 steps through the hallway, 9 across the mudroom, 1 through the side entrance. I counted them every night, Not because I was planning to leave, but because knowing I could leave was the only thing that kept me breathing. Tonight, because of this foundation, because of the women and men in this room, because of the survivors who refused to stay silent. 2,000 women across Ontario know their own step count, and they know that when they're ready, someone will be waiting on the other side of that door. The applause lasted longer than she expected. Josephine was crying in the front row, and beside her sat the woman Asha had recently started seeing. Dr. Erin Caldwell, a family physician who joined the foundation as a volunteer and stayed because she recognized in Asha the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. Their relationship had grown slowly, built on mutual respect and a shared understanding that love should feel like safety, not surveillance. When Erin touched Asha's hand under the table that night, it was with the gentleness of someone who understood that every touch after violence is a question, not a ditch, and Asha's answer every time was yes. Later that evening, a young woman approached Asha at the reception. She was 26, wearing a turtleneck in September, and her eyes had the particular flatness that Asha recognized instantly. The look of someone who'd learned to stop reacting because reactions had consequences. "Or app saved my life," the woman said. "I recorded 11 months of evidence. My lawyer says the case is solid. I'm leaving next week." Asha took her hands. "Then you already know the hardest part isn't leaving. It's believing you deserve to." The woman nodded, and Asha saw in her face the same expression she'd seen in her own mirror 6 years ago. Not hope exactly, but something older and more durable. The decision that surviving was not negotiable. What would you build from the wreckage of someone else's cruelty? Tell me in the comments what you think real justice looks like. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to Bound Beyond Differences for more stories about the power of resilience. Share this with someone who needs to know that counting your steps to the door is not weakness. It's preparation. And remember, the most dangerous thing about a woman who's been underestimated is that she's had years to prepare for the moment she stops being silent.